We ask that you put your right hand over your heart. We ask also, as you pledge allegiance to the United States of America, that you face the flags accordingly. Children, you know what to do. Take it away.
Face your parents. Ready, begin.
There you go. I recommend highly that you do just that with your children, that you do the Pledge of Allegiance before they go off to school. You don't know nowadays what they're doing in the school systems, but you certainly know that you have given them the best when they are at home with you. So please make certain that you do that. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls from around the world, I want to introduce to some, present to others, Lauren L., business owner, consultant, marketer, communications leader, but certainly president of Republican Atheists. So glad to have you on the air with us tonight.
Thank you for having me on the line.
Terrific. Listen, I also want to thank the good people from overseas Germany who brought us in to connect on these matters regarding Sweden, immigration, and so on. But why are you overseas, young lady?
Well, I actually have a long history of learning about Sweden. I'm born and raised in Southern California, and I made my way over here in April of 2016 to move in with my Swedish partner, who is from Sweden and works at an iron ore mine in Sweden.
Oh, well, that's wonderful. Now, I ask in this regard, you're in Sweden. Was it a culture shock for you in making the transition from the United States to the nation of Sweden?
Well, I actually, as I said, I have a long history with Sweden. I started going to Swedish American meetings when I was 8 years old with my mom. There's a group in the U.S. called Vasa Order of America, which is a Swedish American organization. And so we would go to these meetings and learn about the basics of Swedish culture. And I would meet Swedes who are living in America, as well as children of Swedish immigrants. And then I attended a Swedish language camp in Minnesota, which, yes, it exists. There are, it's called Concordia Language Villages in Minnesota, and there's all these little camps built around certain countries. And so for 4 summers, I went to this camp called London, which was 2 weeks to a month of all Swedish culture, speaking in Swedish. They have counselors that actually come from Sweden and speak the language. And then my first time ever living in Sweden was 10 years ago. I was a foreign exchange student through Rotary International Youth Exchange, which I recommend to everybody who has children. When children start getting to the age of 15 to 18, they can go to another country through this foreign exchange program through Rotary. And so I was able to go to Sweden through this program. I became so infatuated with Sweden when I was in the U.S. that I said, well, why don't I just go to Sweden and see it for myself? I mean, it sounds so fun here in the United States from what I've learned about it. Mm-hmm. And I would say that, yes, it was a culture shock when I first lived here 10 years ago. I lived here for 10 months, and I lived with 2 Swedish families. Mm-hmm. This is all through Rotary International Youth Exchange. They set this up for me. And when I first got here, it seemed very similar to the U.S. in terms of it's very advanced. The children here are very much into video games and cell phones and the technology, and the school system and everything operates relatively well, I would say. But into maybe 3 months that I was here, I did go through a culture shock, and it was primarily because I began to see that Swedes tend to be fairly closed people.
Really?
And if you speak to Americans, I think this doesn't get a lot of discussion, not enough discussion actually in the U.S. because up until going to Sweden, I always heard positive things about it. You know, we hear all these great things about healthcare and education and low crime and all these things. And so when I came here, I began to observe that it's very close. The people here tend to be closed, and they will be fairly shy, kind of difficult to communicate with. They're very nice people. Don't get me wrong there. They're very hospitable, and, you know, they'll help you. But in terms of sparking up a conversation, I remember I was in high school and I introduced myself to a number of my schoolmates because I was in the senior year of high school when I came to Sweden 10 years ago. And I thought, okay, I introduced myself to them. You know, tomorrow they're going to say, hi, I'm going to have friends now. You know, that's what we all want. But I noticed that when I would go in the hallway, even though I had introduced myself to my classmates, they would walk by me and keep their heads down, like as though they didn't want to make eye contact with me.
Wow.
And I thought this was really odd because I said, you know, I took some time to introduce myself. And to be honest, I'm kind of a shy person myself. I've always had a hard time introducing myself to people. I'm kind of a quiet person compared to a lot of Americans, actually. But in Sweden, it was just a whole different level. It was very hard for me to communicate with them. And many of my classmates didn't say much to me, even though I was there for a year. So I would say that was the culture shock for me, was to just be in this really closed culture. I wasn't living in a major city, though, but there's a good portion of Swedes that live in more rural communities. So, but surprise, the community I lived in is called Älmhult in Sweden. That was where I first lived, and that's actually the headquarters for IKEA.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, and I didn't even know that because how Rotary works is students don't get to pick the city that they live in. The Rotary group picks a student.
Oh, that's
so
cool.
So I got this letter in the mail, and it said, guess what? You're going to Älmhult. And I'm like, okay, where is that? Like, what's about Älmhult? And and I thought it was so funny that it was the headquarters for IKEA. And I assumed it was going to be kind of a hustling and bustling location, but it was actually a pretty rural community. And
wow.
But to get to the point, I think communication and lack of communication in Sweden was a culture shock. And I've looked further into this, and I've learned that Sweden is one of the most antisocial countries in the world, if not the most antisocial country.
Wow. And so you're the extrovert there, just in jest. But wow, that's amazing in terms of discovery. And I must say this because a lot of people, I want to get this out of the way before we go forward. You're the president of Republican Atheists. I'm a very strong Christian conservative here in the United States. So most people would think that we would be antithetical to one another. We would be hostile to one another. And communication is very important. I don't believe in hostility. I believe in a safe place for people to talk, converse, and give their ideas in the marketplace. And I just want to thank you and applaud you for being willing to come on my program and to develop this relationship between us. So that Americans will be able to get news from Europe without having to go through the filter of CNN or MSNBC or one of the other liberal filters.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for having me on the show. I really love speaking about Sweden and speaking about what's happening in Europe. And as president of Republican Atheists, I've made it a point to focus on communication with all groups. Exactly. And to try to come to an understanding and just to share what I experienced. And I think it's just really important, and I hope to see mass migration discussed more in the U.S.
Yeah, well, with you coming on often, we will. Tonight, we are having a great conversation with Lauren L. She is the president of Republican Atheists. Tonight, we're going to talk about Sweden and, my God, how it has been corrupted by this idea that you can invite people who are hostile to Western civilization into your homes and think that there will not be a change. So we will talk about Sweden, we will talk about Trump, and we will talk about mass migration, better known as invasion of Sweden, and the costs that are being paid right now by the European brethren. You're listening tonight to the Exceptional Conservative Show on the Exceptional Conservative Network. We're going to take a break. We'll be back in 2 minutes, 30 seconds with more of the best in urban conservative talk right after this message. Lauren L. is with us from Sweden tonight. We want to talk about the real story in Sweden and in Europe, and how the UN and Obama and Great Britain and Germany supporting a mass migration into Europe and its result and impact on Europe and especially Sweden. Lauren, I have to ask you, antisocial Sweden, closed off, why did the Swedish people decide that it would be a prudent thing to invite the invaders into their land?
Well, Sweden is a very involved country in the world, and Sweden takes pride in being a country that gives to the world, and it considers itself a very advanced country, a very fortunate country, peaceful, relatively wealthy, and somehow Sweden has become a country that just wants to give to the world and help the world, and so many Swedes have this concept of helping people. And Sweden's had a few migrations throughout the 1900s, and these migrations happened relatively well, according to my basic research. So they thought that they could accept this migration the same. They treated it the same as past migrations, as no problem, and they wanted to be caregivers to these people. So at the same time in Sweden, there's a lot of concepts put forth all the time of equality, accept everybody, be kind to everybody. So when this mass migration was happening, of course, there is this concept of, well, we need to help these people. But at the same time, there's this concept of, well, we're all equal. We're all the same. We have to help each other. So they just didn't, and anyone who criticized it, anyone who said, hey, I have some questions about these people entering the country, I have some, I'm concerned about my neighborhood, those people were shunned, they were scorned, and in the U.S. we heard terms like Nazis and racist and stuff. That happens here in Sweden too. Yeah. So anyone who brought up opposition question was shunned, and so that's generally what happened.
Wow. Now, so was this grassroots led? Was this clergy led? Was this for a political politicians thought it was a wonderful idea, or was it just bureaucrats who decided to step over all parties and improve society by inviting the invaders in?
I haven't looked into specifically what the process was when immigrants started coming into the country back in 2014 and especially in 2015. I just know that there was no policies put in place to really to stop this. Yeah. And I was speaking with another American who's in Sweden who's been following it as well, and she just said policies were in place where there was really nothing to do. Sweden had an open border policy where literally anybody could walk into the country, and there is just nothing to be done. And there is also nothing in place to track anybody, which is interesting because, I first started reading about mass migration here in Europe after the attacks in Cologne, the mass sexual assaults that happened in Cologne, Germany.
Mm-hmm.
New Year's Eve. That was when I first started really tuning in on this, because I read about that in Germany and was like, wow, that sounds horrific. And I knew that Sweden was getting a lot of the same people too, so I started following Swedish media on a regular basis. And yeah, from what I've read, there's no policies in place to stop this. And with Sweden's general concepts of equality and help the people in the world, there was just very little resistance to this.
Wow. And because, as you explained earlier in our opening, the Swedish people are very close, very, secure in their lifestyles, and generous to a fault. The open borders amongst friendly nations, Norway, Germany, the other European states, seemed like a great thing. There weren't any real problems with that. But here comes the introduction from about 2012 onward, under the United Nations and their migrant divisions and their studies, to promote moving individuals from northern Africa and Syria through Turkey onward to Greece into Europe. And you mentioned the fact that people were chastised and scorned as racist. Well, you didn't mention racist, but I know here you were called a racist if you were against Islamic individuals who were 18 to 25-year-olds and males being shipped into your country by the thousands per day. In establishing this, what changed in Sweden from 2012 onward, in terms of the culture, in terms of the people, when the introduction of the Islamists came into the country?
Well, I tend to follow what Swedish media reports. I like to keep up with what they report. I also I go to more right-leaning websites as well, kind of underground websites. They give specific details of what's happening, but I like to keep track of what the Swedish media itself reports. It's really interesting because the Swedish media doesn't report specific events or activities like honor killings or specific rape events and things like that. It's very rare that they'll hone in on events that happen. But they'll report about the Swedish police. And this is what I like to tell people a lot, because there's always people who oppose me when I talk about this subject, and they'll say, you're getting your information from Breitbart or different sources like that. And I like to tell them, actually, this information is coming directly from Swedish media, specifically a source called Swedish Radio, which is right now considered, according to polls, is the second highest trusted source in Sweden. And so it's a legitimate news source in Sweden. But there's been many stories about more money being allocated to the police here in Sweden. There was a lot of police that walked off the job suddenly because they felt that they weren't paid enough and they weren't prepared enough. And so, so to receive more money for police, to hear that police are walking off the job, intelligence tests actually had to be lowered in order to make recruiting police easier. I look at that information and I say, okay, that says a lot of what's happening in Sweden. People will say, there's no crime increase in Sweden. That's all baloney. But I say, no, look at even the Swedish media reporting all of this money being allocated to the police and changes happening just to recruit police. So yes, there has been an increase in crime and increase in rape. And I'm located in northern Sweden, which is less populated, doesn't have it. But down south, I would say there has been changes in society, and I think people are becoming more fearful of walking outside, especially at night.
Yes.
There was a recent news story that a popular Swedish music festival canceled for next year. And one of the primary reasons was because this music festival had been hit with a series of rapes and sexual assaults. And as a result, this has made it difficult for this music festival in Sweden to sell concert tickets. But what I take note of is that the sexual assaults and rapes didn't just simply happen within the music festival grounds. It actually happened outside of the music festival grounds as well. So, I mean, that says something with the drop in sales and tickets. I mean, this is a significant drop, like thousands of tickets weren't sold compared to the previous year.
Well, and this is my...
And so this says that people...
Sorry for me interjecting, but this is my question to you. Do you feel safe in Sweden right now as a woman? Do you feel safe? Because we're hearing about Cologne, Germany. We're hearing about Paris, France. We're hearing about virtually no-go zones in Great Britain. We're hearing that virtually many women are being, blonde, white women are being raped, and it's being reported, and some of them on the alt-right websites, is being reported because you're considered infidels. Do you feel safe?
Personally, I am a bit concerned. I live up north, again, where there's less immigrants. But
yes.
Yeah, even personally, I feel a sense of concern because I'm not able to drive right now. I don't have my driver's license in Sweden, so I get around through public transportation. And I would like to take a class in the nearest town that has, it's called SFI, Svenska för invandrare, which means Swedish for immigrants.
Yes.
The government paid class at schools, and I would like to take a class, but I have to be honest, I am a little concerned if I have to leave school at night when it's dark. I live up north where in the wintertime it'll be dark all day. I mean, we have this change. I don't know if you've heard of something called the midnight sun.
Yes.
But in the summertime here, it's light all day. In the wintertime, it's dark all day. So, yes, it is kind of a concern for me to think that I have to get on a bus by myself, and then I have to go to the town that I live in, get off the bus, because I've heard of situations where women have been taking the train at night. It's been dark. They leave the train, and then they're suddenly attacked.
Wow.
While they're leaving the train because it's dark. And so if I'm in a Svenska för invandrare day class, an SFI class, then I will be directly there with immigrants, and many of them are also placed in the center of towns because they try to keep them centralized and close to facilities and things like that. So it is a little concerning, I think, and I think this is something that's happening across Sweden. It's just people are becoming more cautious of when they're around. I think people are staying inside more because some of the immigrant groups will hang out outside at night, and it is a concern, even for me as an American living in Sweden.
Yes, and that's one of the key points, and because I'm going to run out of time, and so and I want to make certain, Lauren, that I get you to come back on a little bit more often. And the reason is
no problem.
The reason is very simple. You know the reason. We're not getting this news. This is the news that we get. Everybody in Europe they're just so happy to have the Islamists invade, and we're all so happy. And there are a few lone wolves with issues, but everyone else is just happy. And I just don't feel it. I don't believe it. But I want to ask you a final question here so that we can set up you coming back on, hopefully in the next few weeks. So, Donald Trump becomes president. What happened with Sweden at that point?
All the Swedes don't like Trump. This isn't surprising because the media portrayed Trump in a very specific light. I mean, we all noticed this in the U.S. In the U.S., the media portrayed him in a negative light. So it's just understandable that Sweden would definitely double down on putting him in this specific spotlight where, people don't have discussions about the pros and cons. Obviously, everything is just negative, and many people are specifically caught up on his speaking habits, how he spoke, and that's understandable. He's kind of aggressive. As I said, Swedes tend to be very closed and kind of quiet and try to be nice to everybody. So to watch Trump, it's like, wow, who is this guy? And so many people ask me here, what do you think of your president? What do you think of Trump? And but they say it in a way as though they're hoping or they expect me to kind of speak negatively about him and say, oh, he's an embarrassment to my country. But I kind of tiptoe around the conversation because I live in a small town. I try to keep, I want to be friends with everybody.
Yeah, you're trying to keep the peace.
People, I say, I voted for him. And they say, what? You voted for him? And I said, yeah. I mean, who else is there to vote for? And so it kind of takes them a little bit to let that sink in. But yeah, they're just caught up on kind of his communication and how assertive he is. It's something that they're not accustomed to.
Exactly. Lauren L., how can people get in contact with you and follow what you do in Sweden through Republican Atheists? And we thank you for coming on tonight to give us this live, face-up version of really what's going on in Europe. How can people get in contact with you, Lauren?
I put a lot of time into sharing information through Republican Atheists social media sites, specifically Facebook. And, Republican Atheists is focused on sharing more information, not just focused on religion. We talk about a lot of things: Sweden, mass migration, education, probably a lot of things that your listeners are interested in. So Facebook is the primary location, and we also have an email, republicanatheists@gmail.com.
There you go, republicanatheists@gmail.com. Lauren, we're going to ask you back very soon because we are very concerned about overseas citizens' safety and well-being, as well as the Europeans themselves. But we want our American brethren to be secure. And we thank you so much, Lauren, for taking time out of your busy life to be with us. And we look forward to your return.
Thank you for having me on the show.
You're welcome. Lauren L., Republican Atheist President, we thank you so much. We will get her back very soon to talk about the issues. Coming up in just a few moments, we will have none other